There's a silent war tearing through you right now, and not a single person around you knows it's happening. It doesn't show up on your face. Nobody sees it in the way you walk or talk. But it's there, burning behind your eyes, tightening your chest every time someone dismisses you, every time a text goes unanswered and your mind begins to spin, every time one careless sentence from someone else reshapes your entire afternoon. You smile. You carry on. You tell yourself you're fine. But you're not fine. You're fighting every single day. And here's what almost nobody will admit. Most people are losing that fight, not because they lack willpower, but because they were never handed the tools to win it. You've crossed paths with certain people, haven't you? The kind who seem immune to chaos, who don't flinch when someone attacks them publicly, who don't crumble when life goes sideways. They aren't cold. They aren't unfeeling. They have simply built something most people haven't, an internal architecture of emotional control. And today, that architecture becomes yours. In the next few minutes, you're going to learn 9 ancient habits drawn from Stoic philosophy. Habits that forge real, lasting emotional strength. Not the performance of strength. Not fake it till you make it. Actual, practiced, bone-deep resilience. The Stoic philosopher Seneca once observed that human beings tend to suffer far more in the corridors of their imagination than they ever do in the rooms of reality. Think about that. How many hours have you spent tormented by things that never actually happened? Conversations that never took place? Outcomes that never arrived? We rehearse catastrophe. We pre-suffer. We hand our imagination a megaphone and then wonder why we're exhausted. What destroys most people isn't the storm. It's the fear of weather that never comes. To become someone who is genuinely unshakable, you must first reclaim your mind from the fictional disasters it manufactures every morning. Because here is a truth you need to hear plainly. You are not required to absorb every emotion that approaches you. You are not obligated to react to every provocation. You are not a container for other people's chaos. What you are is someone capable of choice. And Stoicism, at its core, is simply the practice of exercising that choice, deliberately, repeatedly, and without apology. It doesn't erase what you feel. No. It teaches you to stand behind your feelings instead of beneath them. It gives you the rare ability to walk through a room full of disorder and carry your own weather. To leave without guilt. To stay silent and still be the most powerful presence in the space. You are not too emotional. You were never broken for feeling deeply. But you will stay stuck in cycles of reaction and regret until you learn to govern that depth. These 9 habits won't manufacture a new identity. They will strip away the layers of unexamined reaction to reveal who you were always capable of being. So if you've ever whispered to yourself, "Why can't I just let things go?" Or, "Why do I always say something I regret?" Or, "I want to be the calm one, the steady one, the one who doesn't break." This is for you. Watch this all the way through. Nay, like it if it's already landing. Write your thoughts in the comments. I read them. And if this channel, Stoic Horizon, is speaking your language, subscribe and share this with one person in your life who needs it. Before we begin, drop this in the comments right now. I am the author of my own reactions. Let's go. Habit 1. Treat every provocation as someone else's story. Someone belittles you in front of others. Someone lies to your face. Someone mocks the thing you worked hardest to build. Your throat tightens. Your pulse lifts. Everything inside you surges toward retaliation. But the Stoic teaching here cuts straight to the bone. What wounds you is rarely the event itself. It is the meaning you assign to it. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who ruled one of the most turbulent empires in history while journaling Stoic philosophy every morning, wrote that external pain doesn't come from the thing itself. It comes from the verdict you deliver about it. Most people take everything personally because their sense of self is built on the outside. If someone pushes back on their opinion, they experience it as an attack on their identity. If someone doesn't respond to their message, they interpret it as rejection. If someone criticizes the work becomes the person. But here is what changes everything. Other people's behavior is almost never actually about you. It is a weather report from inside their life, not a judgment of yours. So the first habit is this: deliberately detach the moment from your ego, not because detachment is emotionless, but because it is the only posture from which you can respond with real power. When the next provocation comes, and it will, try this. Become an observer before you become a participant. Step back mentally. Ask yourself, is this genuinely about me, or am I standing in the crossfire of someone else's internal war? Would I still care about this in 2 days? That gap between stimulus and response is not a pause. That gap is your freedom. The space between what happens and what you say next. That is where your power lives. When you stop feeding everything with personal meaning, you stop being a target. You stop being movable. You become the kind of person who hears an insult and doesn't feel the need to answer it. Not because you've surrendered, but because you've recognized the fight isn't worth the cost of your peace. You're not retreating. You're choosing the battlefield, and that is a fundamentally different thing. Habit 2. Dissolve the rush. Move your emotions in slow motion. You know the sequence. Something happens. Emotion floods in. Anger, panic, wounded pride. And before your rational mind can say a single word, your mouth has already moved. A message sent, a door slammed, a bridge scorched. Then, a few minutes later, regret. That cycle, trigger, flood, reaction, regret, is running most people's lives. And the only thing that breaks it is speed reduction. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we should make it a habit to assume that the people around us act wrongly without full awareness of what they're doing. He was not excusing cruelty. He was slowing down judgment. He was building a delay into the emotional pipeline. Here is the practice. When strong emotion arrives, do not greet it at the door. Let it knock. Let it stand in the hallway. Breathe. Walk away from the conversation if you must. Give it an hour if you can. Why? Because emotions are timed explosives. In the first 60 seconds after a trigger, your mind is operating at its least wise. The chemical surge that accompanies hurt, anger, or humiliation is designed for physical threat, not for navigating complex human relationships. Give it time and something remarkable happens. You discover that most emotional fires burn out entirely on their own, without any action from you. That passive dismissal of something that felt urgent 5 minutes ago, that is growth in real time. That is the brain learning to distinguish between actual danger and emotional noise. Real power isn't loud. It doesn't rush. It doesn't scramble to make its point before the window closes. Real power says what it means, slowly after thought, or says nothing at all, which is often the stronger move. Let others move at the speed of reaction. Let others fire off messages they'll delete in shame. You move like water, deliberate, unhurried, finding its level. Not because you are passive, but because you are precise. Drop this in the comments. I slow my emotions down and reclaim my mind. Habit 3. Stop performing explanations for people who've already decided. You feel it. That urgent pull to justify yourself, to correct the narrative, to make sure they understand your side. So you explain. You go long. You lay out the full context. You make your case, and you already know how it ends. They don't update. They don't listen. They take what you gave them and twist it into new ammunition. Marcus Aurelius said something that should be posted on every wall. Stop wasting time debating what a good person looks like. Simply be one. Here is the truth the Stoics understood that most people miss. The demand for your explanation is often not a request for truth. It's a test of your emotional boundaries. When someone who has already made up their mind asks you to explain yourself, they are not seeking understanding. They are waiting for a weak point, a vulnerability they can press. And the more you explain, the more surface area you expose. The Stoic habit is not silence out of cowardice. It is silence as a statement of self-respect. You don't explain your healing to people who profited from your pain. You don't justify your growth to people who needed you small. You don't translate your worth into words for people who've decided your price already. What does your life say? What does your behavior demonstrate over time? That is your explanation. Let it speak at full volume while you say nothing. Because here is what no one tells you about over-explaining. Every time you do it, you hand the other person the steering wheel. You make your peace conditional on their verdict. You become emotionally dependent on someone else's comprehension. But when you stop needing to be understood by everyone, you become free. Free from approval cycles. Free from the performance of justification. Free from letting misunderstandings shake your foundation. Your peace does not require a translator. Habit 4. Construct an inner boundary that behavior cannot breach. You walk into a room and the atmosphere changes. Someone's hostility lands on you like a hand pressed to your chest. A dismissive glance from a colleague lingers with you all afternoon. Online comments from strangers you will never meet somehow shape your evening. That is not oversensitivity. That is the consequence of having no inner perimeter, no clear line between what is outside you and what you allow to enter. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you have power over your mind, not over external events, and that recognizing this distinction is the source of real strength. The inner boundary is not a wall of numbness. It is not emotional shutdown. It is a practiced, deliberate sense of where you end and where other people's projections begin. Here is what building it looks like in practice. You decide in advance that your self-worth is not held in escrow by other people's opinions. It is not something they can withdraw. It is not available for public bidding. Every time you let an insult pass without internal damage, you lay one more stone in that boundary. Every time you refuse to accept guilt that isn't yours, you raise it another inch. Every time you say that belongs to them, not to me, you are building the most durable structure a human being can carry. Your mind is not public property. Not everyone earns access to the interior. Not every word spoken in your direction deserves a place in your internal dialogue. When someone attempts to destabilize you through mockery, guilt, manipulation, or dismissal, practice this single thought: that arrives at my surface. It does not reach my center. The world will always generate friction. People will test you simply because they can. What changes is not the testing. What changes is how deep it goes. Drop this in the comments. My inner foundation cannot be reached from the outside. Habit 5. Anticipate the worst of others before they deliver it. This is the Stoic habit people most misunderstand as cynicism. It isn't. It is one of the most protective emotional disciplines ever developed. Marcus Aurelius, before leaving his bed each morning, would remind himself that during the day, he would likely encounter people who were selfish, ungrateful, deceptive, or petty. Not because he hated humanity. He was one of the most compassionate leaders in recorded history, but because he refused to be blindsided. Emotional pain is amplified by surprise. When someone you trusted betrays you, the betrayal itself may hurt less than the shattering of the expectation you'd built around them. Stoic premeditation strips away that amplification. It says, I see what human beings are capable of. I hold no fantasy about their permanent goodness. So when the disappointment comes, I am not knocked off my axis, because I was never leaning on an illusion. This is not about distrust. You can still love people, rely on people, invest in people, but you do it with clear eyes. You carry no expectation that makes their failure your catastrophe. When the disrespect arrives, and in life it always does, from friends, colleagues, from people you've helped, from strangers online, you will not flinch because you factored it in. Think of a professional athlete who spends 10 times more hours training than they spend competing. The game doesn't surprise them. The pressure doesn't shatter them. They've already lived this moment in practice 100 times before the crowd arrived. You don't have to be mean to be prepared. You don't have to be closed off to be protected. You just have to stop walking through the world as if everyone has promised you something they never agreed to deliver. Train your expectations to meet reality, and reality will stop feeling like betrayal. Habit 6. Stop reaching for relief. Start reaching for clarity. Something hard happens. you feel the weight of it pressing down. The instinct is immediate. Reach for something that makes it stop. A distraction, a scroll, a drink, a series binge. Anything to escape the discomfort of sitting inside an emotion you don't want. But Stoicism offers a different diagnosis. The problem isn't what you feel. The problem is that you believe feeling it is the emergency. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a fulfilling life doesn't require external abundance. It requires a particular quality of thinking. The architecture of your mind determines the quality of your experience, not the absence of difficulty. Emotions are not the enemy. They are signals. But if you are constantly treating the signal as the problem, if your entire strategy is to make the feeling stop, you will live your whole life in management mode and never develop actual strength. Here is the shift. Instead of asking, "How do I stop feeling this?" ask, "What thought is generating this feeling?" Trace the emotion back to its origin. Is the anger coming from an expectation that wasn't met? Is the sadness coming from a story you told yourself about how things were supposed to go? Is the anxiety built on a prediction that may never materialize? When you find the thought behind the feeling, you find the lever. And pulling the lever, adjusting the thought, is infinitely more effective than numbing the emotion that resulted from it. The emotional escape is temporary. The mental clarity you build by sitting with the discomfort and examining it is permanent. Stop cycling through things that make you feel better for 40 minutes and leave you emptier than before. Start training your mind to think through what you experience. Slowly, honestly, without judgment. Feelings will always arrive. What changes is whether they arrive in a mind that is equipped to work with them or one that is desperate to outrun them. Habit 7. Let emotions pass without turning them into verdicts. You wake up in a bad mood, not for any specific reason. You're just heavy, off, low in a way you can't locate. And immediately your mind begins its investigation. What is wrong with me? Is something about to go wrong? Why can't I just feel okay? And here is where the secondary suffering begins. Not in the emotion itself, but in the interrogation of it. Epictetus observed that suffering doesn't arise from things themselves, but from the judgments we lay over them. You feel anxious. Then you judge the anxiety as a symptom of something broken. You feel flat. Then you diagnose the flatness as evidence of failure. The emotion was the first layer. Your story about the emotion became the cage. The Stoic practice here is the art of observation without verdict. You witness what you feel without immediately classifying it as meaningful. You might simply be tired. You might have eaten badly. You might be in a natural emotional trough that follows a natural high. The body cycles. The nervous system adjusts. Not every variation requires an explanation or a fix. Think of emotions as weather systems, temporary, atmospheric, not a statement about the permanent condition of the terrain below. Clouds do not make the mountain a different mountain, and a difficult morning does not make you a different person. You are allowed to feel bad without concluding that your life is going wrong. You are allowed to feel uncertain without declaring yourself lost. You are allowed to carry a low feeling through a day and let it complete its arc without feeding it new material. Observe, accept, release. No verdict required. Drop this in the comments. My emotions pass through me. They do not define me. Habit 8. Choose silence and discomfort as practice, not punishment. When was the last time you sat in complete quiet? No music, no content, no device in your hand. For 10 uninterrupted minutes. If your honest answer is, I can't remember, that gap in your experience is costing you more than you realize. Modern life has constructed an environment engineered to prevent stillness. Every screen you own is competing for the exact seconds in which silence would otherwise occur. And those seconds, the awkward, restless, and slightly uncomfortable pauses, those are the seconds in which real self-knowledge develops. Epictetus said that difficulty reveals character. He wasn't speaking of dramatic crisis. He was speaking about the small, ordinary friction you choose to sit inside rather than escape. Here is what sustained silence does. It removes the insulation between you and your thoughts. Not the curated thoughts, Not the ones you perform for an audience, but the real ones. The unfiltered, unedited movement of your actual mind. That's uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. Because on the other side of that discomfort is the kind of self-knowledge that no productivity system, no motivational playlist, and no influencer strategy can manufacture. And it extends beyond silence. The Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort as a training tool, going without food to understand hunger, wearing minimal clothing to understand cold, saying no to pleasures they could easily have had. Not to suffer, but to build proof that they could exist without comfort and remain fully themselves. You don't need to be extreme, but you do need to practice some version of this deliberately. 10 minutes of silence each morning, a cold shower, a difficult conversation you've been avoiding, a craving you let pass rather than satisfy. Each of these is a small act of training. Each one sends the same signal to your nervous system. I do not require constant comfort to remain steady. And when you have sent that signal enough times, the world loses much of its leverage over you. Because the two most common tools people use to manipulate emotion, the promise of pleasure and the threat of discomfort, no longer have the same reach. You've already been where they're threatening to send you. You survived. You're stronger. Habit 9. Become a detective of your own emotional patterns. You lose it. Maybe you said something cutting. Maybe you withdrew for days without warning. Maybe you made a decision from pure emotion that you'd undo if you could. Here is what most people do with that. They feel guilty. They put it behind them, and they repeat the same pattern in 3 months when the right trigger arrives again. Here is what the Stoics do. They study it. Seneca wrote that a person cannot be refined without friction, that the trials we encounter are the material from which character is forged. But that's only true if you learn from them. Trials that go unexamined don't build character. They just repeat themselves. So treat every emotional slip as a case file, not as evidence of your inadequacy, but as precise data about your internal landscape. Ask yourself, what was the trigger? Not the surface trigger, the actual one. What belief was operating underneath your reaction? What did you need to be true in that moment that turned out to be false? Maybe you exploded because someone treated you dismissively. And underneath that explosion was a belief that your value must constantly be demonstrated and defended. That belief is not their fault. That's the seam of the work. Write it down, genuinely. A short note in a journal after a difficult emotional moment is one of the most productive mental health tools in existence. Not because writing heals you automatically, but because the act of articulating an experience precisely forces you to see it from a slight distance. And distance is the beginning of mastery. Over time, you will begin to see patterns. The same 3 environments tend to strip your composure. The same type of comment reliably opens a particular wound. The same emotional sequence precedes every regrettable choice. Once you can see the pattern, you own it. And once you own it, you can interrupt it. You will feel the emotion begin to build, and instead of becoming the reaction, you will watch it arrive. You will say, internally, here it is again. I know this one. And from that position of recognition, you will choose your response with the kind of deliberateness that turns a person from reactive into powerful. Emotional mastery is not the permanent absence of slipping. It is the progressive shortening of the gap between the slip and the self-awareness. It is the slow, patient, evidence-based work of knowing yourself more precisely with every passing week. Drop this in the comments. Every reaction I've had is a map toward the person I'm becoming. In a world built on outrage, noise, and performance, the person who chooses stillness is doing something revolutionary. Not the stillness of avoidance, not the stillness of someone who's given up. The stillness of someone who has built something internal that the external world no longer has the power to dismantle. You've just absorbed 9 of the most practical, ancient, rigorously tested habits for emotional architecture that exist. If you practice them, not perfectly, but persistently, your life will begin to change at the level of your actual experience, not just your intentions. You will stop being pulled sideways by every person who needs you reactive. You will stop gifting your most valuable inner resource, your peace, to people who do nothing with it but spend it. You will move through difficulty without performing the difficulty. You will feel the full weight of hard things without collapsing under them. You will become, over time, someone whose quiet is louder than other people's noise. Because here is the final truth that ties all 9 habits together. The most formidable thing a human being can become is not someone who never feels. It is someone who feels everything and is governed by none of it. That is the Stoic promise. Not invulnerability, true sovereignty over self. Your emotion is not your weakness. Unchecked emotion is your weakness, and today you've been given 9 specific keys to put back in your own hands. 9 disciplines that real people, emperors, philosophers, soldiers, and ordinary men and women who chose discipline over default have used across 23 centuries to build exactly the kind of inner steadiness you're reaching for right now. If this reached you, if any part of this felt like something you needed to hear, hit like right now and subscribe to Stoic Horizon. Share this with one person you care about who is quietly in that battle we talked about at the beginning. Drop your final affirmation in the comments. My calm is not weakness. My calm is command. This is your life. These are your terms. Now go live them fully.